The lion stood alone in the clearing, his breath sharp and trembling as he faced the pride advancing toward the wounded gorilla behind him. Moonlight glinted off his mane, turning him into a creature shaped by fury and fear. The gorilla lay motionless, her chest rising faintly, her strength fading with every moment the lions drew closer. The male lion stepped forward, ready to strike, but the younger lion roared, a sound torn not from instinct, but from desperation. Seeing him shield her with his own body made my heart clench. No one expected a lion to fight for a gorilla. The savannah was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of silence that felt heavy, as if the land itself knew something was wrong. A thin veil of dust drifted above the dry grass as the lion pride moved steadily across the plain. At the very back, lagging several paces behind the rest, stumbled a newborn lion cub. He was shockingly small, his legs trembling with every step, his breaths shallow as though the world was already too heavy for him. The mother lioness kept glancing back, torn between instinct and necessity. She had given birth to 3 cubs only days ago, but this one, this tiny, fragile creature, had been weak from the first moment he opened his eyes. Predators roamed nearby. Food was scarce. Injuries from recent territory fights had left the pride exhausted. Survival demanded speed, strength, and sacrifice. And today, sacrifice came in the form of a cub too weak to walk. When the pride picked up their pace, the lioness hesitated, then finally turned away from her smallest offspring. The cub tried to follow, dragging himself through the grass, his tiny paws sinking into the dust. His siblings disappeared into the tall reeds. His mother vanished after them. Soon, the faint rustle of the retreating pride faded until nothing remained but wind. The cub collapsed. His sides rose and fell rapidly as he struggled for air. Vultures circled overhead, drifting closer with each passing minute. A distant cackle of hyenas echoed across the plain. The sun climbed higher, burning down on his frail body. He twitched once, then lay still, barely clinging to consciousness. Seeing him like that, I felt a sting in my chest, as if the weight of his abandonment pressed down on me too. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, the first hyena emerged from behind a cluster of acacia trees. It crept forward cautiously, nose twitching, sensing weakness, sensing opportunity. The cub didn't move. Another hyena padded closer, then another. They formed a loose half-circle, approaching with the slow, patient certainty of predators closing in on an inevitable kill. Suddenly, the hyenas froze. A deep grunt rippled across the clearing, followed by heavy footsteps that vibrated through the ground. Pushing aside the brush came a massive female gorilla. Her silver-streaked fur shimmered in the light, and her broad chest rose and fell with measured breaths. She stood upright, towering over the hyenas. They snarled, uncertain, but the gorilla bared her teeth and beat her chest once with a thundering crack. The hyenas retreated instantly, melting back into the grass. The gorilla looked down at the motionless cub. Her expression softened in a way that didn't seem possible for a creature built with such power. She reached out and gently nudged him. The cub let out a weak, broken cry. For a moment, the gorilla simply stared, her dark eyes reflecting something old and heavy, memory, perhaps, or grief. She had once lost her own infant to a leopard. The wound never healed, and now, before her, lay another abandoned child of the wild. She scooped the cub into her arms with an unexpected tenderness. His head rested against her chest, barely moving, his breaths faint. She held him close, shielding him from the wind, from the sun, from the loneliness that had nearly taken his life. Watching her lift him so carefully made me wonder how many times she had hoped for a chance to protect something again, simply to fill the ache of what she once lost. With the cub pressed close, she began walking back toward the dense forest the gorillas called home. The troop would not welcome this. Gorillas had no reason to trust lions, but she didn't hesitate. Some instinct deeper than fear guided her steps. As night approached, the savannah glowed with fading gold. The gorilla paused once on a rocky rise and looked back across the plains. The pride was gone. The cub, too weak to lift his head, didn't see any of it, but wrapped in the gorilla's arms, he was no longer alone. That moment made me realize how fragile the line is between life and death, and how often survival begins with the kindness of an unexpected guardian. The forest embraced them with a cool, muted hush as the gorilla carried the weakened lion cub deeper into its shadowed heart. Tall trees arched overhead like ancient guardians, their leaves whispering in the breeze. The gorilla moved steadily, her strong arms cradling the cub against her chest as if he were her own. Every so often, she paused to adjust him, ensuring his head rested comfortably against her thick fur. The troop noticed her return long before she stepped into the clearing. A chorus of grunts, huffs, and curious murmurs rippled through the group. Young gorillas clung to their mothers wide-eyed as the silverback leader approached with heavy, deliberate strides. His massive frame cast a long shadow across the ground. He stopped in front of her and stared at the bundle in her arms. Confusion flickered through his gaze, followed quickly by disapproval. Gorillas did not adopt predators. Lions were threats, rivals on the food chain, unpredictable in instinct and behavior. But the female held her ground, clutching the cub protectively. The silverback rumbled, a low warning that vibrated through the soil. She responded with a soft grunt, raising the cub slightly as if presenting him. A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves. The silverback leaned closer, sniffing at the cub, who stirred weakly in her grasp. For a moment, it seemed he might force her to abandon the creature, but then something shifted in his posture, a subtle recognition. Perhaps he sensed the fragility of the dying cub. Perhaps he remembered the grief she carried. Whatever it was, the silverback backed away slowly, giving a short, reluctant grunt of acceptance. The troop relaxed, though their eyes remained filled with uncertainty. The gorilla settled beneath a broad fig tree and held the cub close to her chest. She brought him tiny pieces of softened fruit, but the cub was too weak to eat. His breaths were shallow, his body limp. She pulled him closer and pressed him against her, letting the warmth of her body replace the sunlight he had lost when he was abandoned on the plains. Seeing her rock him gently despite his claws and teeth, despite everything nature had designed them to be, made me strangely emotional, as though witnessing a small miracle that shouldn't make sense but did. As night fell, the forest filled with distant calls and shifting shadows. The cub whimpered softly in his sleep, haunted by instinctive fears he didn't understand. The gorilla tightened her embrace. When a branch snapped in the darkness, she rose instantly, positioning herself between the sound and the cub. Her breath came loud and steady, ready to defend him against anything that moved through the night. Hours passed. The female gorilla stayed awake, watching for danger. Only when the moon rose high did she finally let her muscles relax. The cub's tiny body rose and fell with slightly stronger breaths, the first sign of improvement since she had found him. She stroked his back gently, humming a low rhythmic sound meant to soothe frightened infants. Far away beyond the trees, a lion's roar echoed across the savannah. The cub twitched, instinct pulling him toward a world he didn't yet know. But he didn't cry out. He didn't struggle. Instead, he buried his face deeper into the gorilla's fur, choosing the safety of the moment over the call of instinct. Watching him settle like that made me think about how often survival begins not with strength, but with the courage to trust something unfamiliar. By dawn, the cub lifted his head for the first time. His eyes, still clouded with exhaustion, blinked up at the gorilla. She responded with a soft rumble, brushing her fingers along his side. He attempted to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him, sending him tumbling into her lap. She caught him effortlessly, pulling him close again. The troop gathered nearby, observing cautiously. A few younger gorillas approached, inching forward with curiosity. One reached out and touched the cub's paw before retreating quickly behind his mother's legs. The troop murmured with uncertain acceptance. The cub's future in the forest was still unclear. He was a predator among herbivores, a lion among gorillas. But for now, at least for this fragile beginning, he had shelter, warmth, and a guardian willing to fight for him. That realization reminded me that hope often arrives quietly, carried by those we least expect. The mornings in the gorilla forest soon developed a familiar rhythm. As sunlight filtered through the canopy and broken ribbons, the troop would begin their day with low grunts and soft shuffling through the underbrush. Amid them, the lion cub slowly regained his strength. Each sunrise added a little more weight to his steps, a little more clarity to his eyes. He was still small for his age, still fragile in many ways, but he was alive and growing. The female gorilla remained constantly at his side. She guided him through every new experience, as if introducing him to a world he had nearly never known. When the troop foraged, she offered him bits of fruit or roots she softened with her teeth. The cub sniffed them suspiciously, often pawing at them before attempting a hesitant bite. His grimace after tasting bitter roots always sent the young gorillas into bursts of giggles, while he looked up in confusion, unsure whether he was being mocked or welcomed. One morning, the troop gathered near a cluster of fig trees. The older gorillas climbed effortlessly, swinging from branches with practiced grace. The cub watched them with wide eyes, fascinated by their movements. The female gorilla nudged him forward gently, encouraging him to try. He approached the trunk, planted his claws, and began to scramble upward. But lions were not built for climbing, and he slid down almost immediately, landing on his rear with a thud. The troop erupted into soft, playful hoots. Even the silverback gave a rumbling exhale that could almost be mistaken for amusement. The cub shook himself off, looking offended for a brief moment before attempting the climb again. He managed only a few inches before losing his grip once more. Seeing him keep trying despite his obvious disadvantage made me feel an unexpected swell of pride, as though he represented a kind of stubborn hope that refused to bend to nature's rules. Not all lessons came with laughter. Some arrived through danger. One afternoon, while the troop rested near a fallen log, The cub wandered a bit too far, drawn by the fluttering wings of a hornbill perched nearby. He crouched low, belly flat against the ground, attempting the instinctive stalk of a predator. But his focus on the bird kept him from noticing the leopard slinking through the shadows behind him. The leopard's eyes narrowed as it prepared to pounce. Before it could make its move, the female gorilla launched herself forward with a roar that shook the leaves. She struck the ground hard in front of the leopard, scattering leaves in every direction. Startled, the leopard retreated, melting back into the dense foliage with a final hiss. The cub froze in place, realizing only then how close he had been to death. The gorilla gathered him in her arms and held him tightly, her breathing still heavy from the confrontation. The troop circled around them, murmuring in concern. Even the silverback watched with an expression that hovered between disapproval and respect. The cub tucked his head beneath her chin, trembling faintly. It was the first time he understood in a truly instinctive way that this creature, who looked nothing like him, was his protector. That moment made me wonder how many times she had silently chosen to stand between him and the world, simply because she couldn't bear to lose another child. As weeks passed, the cub's muscles strengthened. He practiced pouncing on fallen branches, chasing leaves that skittered in the wind, and wrestling gently with younger gorillas who dared to engage him. His attempts to mimic gorilla behavior, thumping his chest with soft rhythmic taps, always made the troop laugh. The sound didn't echo like theirs. It came out hollow, uneven, and strangely adorable. Despite growing more confident, the cub remained fiercely attached to the female gorilla. He followed her everywhere. When she moved through thick vines, he crawled after her. When she sat to rest, he curled against her side. When she ate, he nudged her for attention or leaned into her warmth. She accepted all of it without complaint. Yet beneath these peaceful days, the forest carried its own tensions. Predators wandered at its edges. Food supplies shifted with the seasons. And somewhere beyond the trees, the lion pride roamed the savanna, unaware that the weakest member they had left behind was being raised by the very species they seldom encountered. One evening, as the troop settled among the roots of a giant fig tree, the cub attempted once more to imitate the gorillas. The young ones drummed their chests proudly, so he rose onto his hind legs, wobbled dangerously, and tapped at his chest with tiny paws. The taps made barely any sound, but he looked around with such earnest pride that even the silverback let out a low, amused grunt. The female pulled him close, grooming the top of his head with slow, thoughtful strokes. Over time, her scent had seeped into his fur, masking the lion smell almost completely. To the troop, he no longer seemed like a threat. To the gorilla, he no longer seemed like a stranger. Watching them settle together beneath the fading light made me reflect on how love sometimes grows in places where it has no reason to exist, shaped not by blood, but by need, resilience, and quiet devotion. By the time the moon climbed above the treetops, the cub was fast asleep in her lap, his soft breaths rising and falling in perfect harmony with hers. Whatever challenges waited beyond the forest, for now he belonged to this troop, to this mother, to this unlikely family carved out of survival and second chances. That thought reminded me how unpredictable life can be, and how often the most extraordinary bonds are born from moments when the world seems determined to break us. The lion cub was no longer the trembling infant the gorilla had rescued. Months of steady nourishment and gentle protection had transformed him. His legs grew stronger, his shoulders broader, and his once thin frame now carried the early promise of a predator built for power. But despite his physical growth, he still moved with a softness that came from being raised among gorillas rather than lions. One morning, as the troop traveled toward a stream at the forest's edge, the cub pushed ahead with unusual eagerness. The sun shimmered through the branches, and the smell of open grasslands drifted toward them. For reasons he couldn't understand, something in that scent tugged at him, awakening instinct buried deep within him. He stepped beyond the final line of trees, and for the first time since he had been carried into the forest, the savanna lay open before him. He lowered his head to sniff the ground. Dust, dry grass, and something else. Something familiar. His tail twitched. His muscles stiffened. Without realizing it, he began to walk farther from the tree line. The gorilla called out behind him, a low, cautioning grunt, but he didn't turn back. A force older than memory pulled him forward. Just a few yards ahead, a group of impalas grazed peacefully. The cub froze, dropping into an instinctive crouch. His heart pounded. His paws shifted in the dirt. Something primal flickered in his amber eyes. The troop watched from the shadows, confused by the sudden change in his posture. Before he could attempt a clumsy chase, the impalas bolted, not because of him, but because something far larger emerged from behind a mound of tall grass. A lioness stepped into view. She was lean, powerful, and carried the unmistakable authority of a hunter. Two other lionesses followed, and then, with the slow, commanding gait of dominance, a massive male lion appeared. His mane caught the sunlight, glowing like fire. They scanned the area, unaware of the watching gorillas, but keenly aware of the cub standing half-exposed in the open. The cub's breath stopped. He didn't know why his chest tightened or why his paws trembled. He only knew that he had seen creatures like this before, somewhere far back in blurry fragments of memory. The gorilla stepped forward from the forest, beating her chest once in warning. The lionesses whipped their heads toward the sound, surprised to see a gorilla protecting a lion cub. They exchanged low growls, circling slowly with growing suspicion. The male lion approached last, his eyes fixed on the cub. He lowered his head, sniffing the air, analyzing the strange scent the cub carried. It was lion, but buried beneath the musk of forest and gorilla fur. He growled softly, the sound reverberating across the plain. The cub stepped backward, pressing himself against the gorilla's leg. She placed a massive hand over him, shielding him from view. The sight of the two species standing together, united rather than hostile, was so unnatural that it stirred confusion through the pride. Watching the cub lean into her for protection made my chest tighten. It was the clearest proof of how deeply he saw her, not as a captor or caretaker, but as his mother. The male lion advanced another step. The gorilla let out a guttural warning sound, bracing herself. The pride spread out, circling her cautiously. To them, this was unfamiliar territory. Lions fought gorillas and legends whispered through the savannah, but rarely in reality. The cub began to shake. His instincts whispered that he should run to the pride, that these creatures were his kind, his blood. But his heart pulled him back to the one who had saved him, fed him, warmed him, and guarded him with her life. Torn between instinct and attachment, he let out a small, trembling cry. The sound hit the lioness at the front like a spark. She stiffened, her eyes widened. She stepped closer, lowering her head until she was only inches from him. She inhaled deeply, searching for a memory she had long buried. Then she backed up 2 steps, her ears flicking with sudden recognition. She growled softly to the others, not in aggression, but in realization. The cub before them was hers. The troop tensed. The gorilla tightened her arm around him, not understanding the shift. The male lion stared at the cub with a mixture of disbelief and confusion. A low rumble rolled through his chest, not hostile, something closer to astonishment. The cub blinked up at them, overwhelmed. The gorilla pulled him close again, unwilling to let go. Seeing that moment unfold made me wonder how destiny can twist 2 worlds together only to pull them apart when we least expect it. The male lion stepped forward again, this time without menace. He chuffed softly, a greeting used for cubs. The lioness echoed it. The cub's ears perked. His body leaned forward just slightly, torn between 2 identities. But then a sudden snarl ripped through the air. From the left, a hyena bolted into the clearing, drawn by the standoff. It lunged toward the troop, hoping to exploit the tension between lions and gorillas. The gorilla swung around, snarling, ready to defend her adopted child. The cub stumbled backward, frantic. The pride reacted instantly. The male lion roared, charging forward. The gorilla braced herself. For a heartbeat, all of them, gorilla, lion, cub, stood united by danger rather than divided by species. That fragile alliance made me believe that even the wildest instincts can bend in the presence of something deeper than fear. The days following the tense encounter on the savannah left the guerrilla troop unsettled. Although no battle had broken out, the presence of the lion pride lingered like a shadow at the edge of the forest. Every rustle in the grass made the younger gorillas skitter closer to their mothers. The silverback remained perpetually alert, scanning the tree line with narrowed eyes. But the one most affected was the cub. He paced often, staring toward the open plains as though drawn by an unseen thread. The gorilla, the only mother he had ever known, kept him close, sensing his confusion even if she couldn't understand its cause. Whenever he looked too long at the horizon, she would place a gentle hand on his shoulder, grounding him back into the world he belonged to. One morning, as mist curled through the branches, a distant cry shattered the troop's quiet routine. It wasn't the cry of a predator. It was sharp, frantic, the sound of distress from one of their own. Without hesitation, the female gorilla raced toward it, her feet pounding against the soft earth. The cub followed several strides behind her, struggling to keep up. They found a young gorilla trapped beneath a fallen branch. The area around him was torn up, the dirt scattered as though something heavy had charged through. The baby cried out, clutching his arm in pain. The gorilla mother rushed to lift the branch, muscles straining as she heaved it aside. The cub darted forward to nuzzle the frightened youngster, offering what comfort he could. But the moment the branch rolled free, a low growl rumbled from the bushes. A pack of hyenas stepped into the clearing. Their eyes glittered with hunger, their bodies lean and restless. The largest among them licked its teeth, circling slowly. They had followed the struggling baby, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Now they found not one victim, but an injured infant, an exposed gorilla, and a lion cub, still too small to defend himself. The female gorilla roared, slamming her fists against the ground. The sound thundered through the trees. She positioned herself in front of both the cub and the injured youngster, her stance wide and threatening. The hyenas hesitated, but didn't retreat. They were bold, desperate, and emboldened by their numbers. Watching her stand alone against a pack of predators made my throat tighten. She had already lost one child in her lifetime, and it was clear she refused to lose another. The largest hyena crept forward. The gorilla lunged, swinging with a force that sent leaves spiraling into the air. The hyena dodged, snapping at her arm. Another darted in from behind, attempting to grab her leg. She spun, striking wildly, but the pack was too many. They circled her with ruthless coordination. The cub growled, tiny compared to the predators surrounding them, but he stayed close to the injured gorilla baby. His instinct screamed at him to run, yet his heart anchored him beside the only family he had ever known. The hyenas pressed closer. The gorilla lashed out with a powerful blow that sent one tumbling backward, yelping, but the victory came with a cost. A second hyena lunged at her exposed side, sinking its teeth deep into her shoulder. She roared in agony. Blood streaked her fur. The cub yelped, trembling. The troops' distant calls grew louder, reinforcements rushing in, but they were too far away. The female gorilla staggered, her breath coming in harsh gasps. She fought with a desperation born of love rather than instinct, but even her immense strength could not match the relentless rhythm of the pack. Another bite, another blow. Her knees dipped. Seeing her collapse to one hand made me feel a painful twist inside, as if a chapter of hope was tearing itself apart in slow motion. The cub couldn't bear it. He stepped forward, snarling as fiercely as his small body allowed. The sight of a lion cub protecting a gorilla baby momentarily confused the hyenas. Their hesitation lasted only seconds, but it was enough for the gorilla to gather her final reserves of strength. She lunged again, grabbing the largest hyena by the neck and hurling it into a tree trunk. The violent impact sent it scrambling away with a whine, but the momentary triumph drained the last of her strength. She fell to her knees, then slumped sideways, panting uncontrollably. The hyenas regrouped, circling again. The troop finally burst into the clearing. The silverback charged with a fury unlike anything the cub had ever seen, scattering the remaining hyenas into the grass. Mothers scooped up their young, pulling them close, while the others surrounded the injured gorilla. She lay on her side, eyes half open, breathing shallow. Blood dripped steadily from her wounds. The cub pressed himself against her chest, nuzzling her fur in frantic desperation. Her hand twitched, brushing weakly against his back. She recognized him. He could feel it in the faint tremor of her fingers. He let out a soft, broken cry. The troop murmured in grief as they surrounded her. Even the silverback lowered his head, acknowledging the gravity of her sacrifice. She had risked everything for a baby that was not her own, for a cub that nature had not designed her to protect. The cub looked at the troop, then at her, then toward the distant savanna, the pride, the lions, the creatures who shared his blood. He didn't know them, but he knew they were strong. He knew they could fight off hyenas, and for the first time he understood something with painful clarity. He needed them. That realization struck me deeply. Sometimes the hardest choices come not from abandoning those we love, but from seeking help when love alone is no longer enough. The cub stepped away from her slowly, trembling with fear and determination. The silverback grunted in confusion as the cub turned toward the open plain, his small frame dwarfed by the towering grass. He took one last look at the gorilla who had saved him, raised him, and loved him without hesitation. Her breath rattled softly, fading. Then he ran. He ran toward the savannah, toward the lions who did not know him, toward a hope he prayed would not betray him. Every stride carried the weight of the choice he never wanted to make. And as he disappeared beyond the trees, I realized that courage sometimes means walking straight into the unknown simply because someone you love needs you to. The lion cub had never run like this before. His legs, once shaky and unsure, now carried him across the savannah with a desperation fueled by fear and love. Grass whipped against his sides as he raced toward a world he barely remembered, a world of lions, power, and danger. The sun dipped lower behind him, stretching his shadow across the ground like a reminder of the creature he was meant to become. He slowed only when the first roar trembled through the air. It rolled across the plains like thunder, deep and commanding. His heart pounded against his ribs. He recognized that sound instinctively. The pride was near. He approached carefully, weaving between patches of tall grass until he reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a shallow valley. Below, the pride lounged in the fading light. The lionesses rested in the shade while the massive male stood guard, mane glowing amber, beneath the sinking sun. The cub hesitated, frightened by his own instincts telling him both to retreat and to cry out. He stepped forward and let out a small roar, thin, uncertain, but loud enough to echo down the slope. The lionesses lifted their heads instantly. The male narrowed his eyes, muscles tightening as he scanned the hill. The cub roared again, louder this time. His voice cracked, but the urgency behind it carried across the wind. The pride recognized him, not by scent, not by appearance, but by the strange familiarity of a cub they had assumed dead long ago. The male lion climbed the slope toward him. The cub shook, but didn't back down. He looked up at the towering figure and let out a desperate, pleading cry. The lion paused. For the first time, the cub's scent reached him clearly. Beneath the layers of forest and gorilla musk, a buried trace of their lineage surfaced, faint but unmistakable. The lion rumbled softly, a question rather than a threat. The cub turned toward the forest and growled weakly, signaling danger. Then he ran a few steps in that direction, stopped, and looked back at the pride as if begging them to follow. Seeing him try to speak across the barrier of instinct and language struck something deep in me. It was a reminder of how fiercely even the smallest creature can fight for the one who once fought for them. The male lion chuffed at the lionesses, and they rose in unison. There was no hesitation. They followed the cub as he sprinted back toward the trees, moving with the fluid power of trained hunters ready for battle. By the time they reached the forest's edge, night had begun to sink into the land. Shadows pooled beneath the branches, carrying the scent of blood and danger. The cub raced ahead, weaving through the trees until he reached the clearing where the gorilla troop had gathered. Chaos greeted them. Hyenas swarmed the perimeter, snarling and lunging as the silverback fought them off with furious strength. The troop circled around the wounded gorilla mother, trying to protect her. The young gorilla she had saved clung to her side, trembling. The air throbbed with roars, screams, and the cruel laughter of predators. When the pride burst through the underbrush, everything shifted. The hyenas turned, startled and suddenly unsure. The lionesses spread out, forming a lethal crescent. The male lion roared, the sound shaking birds from the treetops. The silverback paused, shocked by the sudden alliance. The cub ran straight to the gorilla mother and pressed himself against her, whimpering softly. The largest hyena lunged first, hoping to finish what it started. A lioness intercepted it mid-leap, slamming it into the dirt. Another hyena darted toward the cub, but the male lion blocked its path with a bone-rattling roar. The forest exploded into a storm of violence as predators collided in a blur of fangs, claws, and raw fury. The gorillas, emboldened by the arrival of the pride, joined the fight. The silverback charged, striking a hyena so hard it tumbled across the clearing. The troop moved as one, pushing back the attackers with surprising coordination. The cub stood beside the gorilla mother, shaking but refusing to leave her side. He growled every time a hyena came near, even though his small body was no match for them. He was no longer the weak, abandoned newborn the savannah had left to die. He had become something else, a bridge between worlds, a creature shaped by two families. Watching him defend her among lions and gorillas made me feel something shift inside, as though witnessing a moment where the wild briefly forgot its rules. The battle raged until the hyenas finally broke. Their morale shattered, they retreated into the night, leaving the clearing littered with torn earth and broken branches. The lions stood panting, their bodies marked with scratches, but still radiating strength. The silverback lowered his arms slowly, his chest heaving. Silence settled, broken only by the labored breathing of the injured gorilla mother. The cub pressed his forehead against hers. Her eyes fluttered open. She recognized him, her hand lifting weakly to rest on his back. The lionesses watched quietly. Even the male lion remained still, as though honoring the strange, impossible bond between them. That moment reminded me that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought for territory or survival, but for love that defies every law of nature. The forest was quiet after the battle, the kind of quiet that feels too heavy to be peace. The lions and gorillas stood in the same clearing, their breaths rising in uneven waves as the dust slowly settled. The moon filtered through the canopy in pale streaks, illuminating the wounded gorilla mother lying at the center. The cub remained pressed against her, refusing to move even as the pride approached cautiously. The lionesses exchanged uncertain glances. Never before had they witnessed a gorilla fight for a lion cub with the ferocity of a mother defending her own. The massive male lion stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the injured gorilla. Instead of aggression, there was something else in his gaze. Recognition, perhaps even respect. He lowered his head slightly, a gesture the cub did not fully understand, but instinctively accepted. The cub nuzzled the gorilla mother again, then looked up at the pride with pleading eyes, as if begging them to understand what she meant to him. Seeing that look on his face, caught between two worlds, touched me deeply, because it showed how love can shape identity more powerfully than blood ever could. The silverback approached the lion pride slowly, his posture wary but not hostile. He studied the lions, then looked down at the cub, then back at the gorilla mother. In that moment, he seemed to understand that the cub's future might extend far beyond the forest. The lionesses moved closer to the cub. One leaned in and sniffed him gently. Her eyes softened as the buried memory resurfaced. The tiniest cub she once left behind, now grown, scarred, and impossibly alive. She touched her nose to his forehead. The cub startled, unsure how to respond, yet he didn't retreat. He had always believed the gorilla mother was the only family he had, but now he found himself surrounded by two. The gorilla mother stirred faintly, her breath shallow but steady. She lifted her hand and touched the cub's paw, her fingers trembling. He pressed closer, letting out a soft, aching cry. It was then that the lioness lay down beside them, forming a protective half-circle around both gorilla and cub. The gorilla mother blinked slowly, her tired eyes shifting between the lions and her adopted child. Somehow, even in her weakened state, she seemed to understand. She had brought him this far. She had given him safety, warmth, and a reason to survive. And now, she would trust the world to take him the rest of the way. Watching her accept that truth made my heart ache. Letting go is sometimes the most painful form of love. As dawn approached, a thin veil of gold crept over the clearing. The gorilla mother exhaled deeply, her hand falling gently away from the cub's paw. The cub whimpered, pushing his head against her chest, refusing to accept the stillness settling into her limbs. The lioness leaned forward, touching her nose to the cub's shoulder, offering comfort in the only way she knew. The male lion released a deep, mournful rumble, a rare sound that echoed through the trees like a farewell. The silverback knelt beside the gorilla mother, placing a hand over her chest. He bowed his head. The troop gathered silently behind him, honoring the one who had given her life to protect a child not of her own kind. After several long moments, the cub lifted his head. He looked at the troop, then at the pride, and then back at the gorilla mother. The weight of the moment settled over him like a mantle he hadn't asked for but would learn to carry. The lioness stepped back slightly, giving him space to choose. He stood, trembling, torn. He nuzzled the gorilla mother one last time, then turned toward the pride. His steps were hesitant, but each one carried the quiet acceptance of a new beginning. The lioness pressed her head gently against his. The male lion gave a low rumble of acknowledgment. As the cub walked away with them, he paused once more to look back at the forest, at the life that had shaped him. That moment made me believe more than ever that family isn't defined by the bodies we're born into, but by the hearts that carry us through our darkest nights.